So
Mm-hmm.
I will just weep. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Today is going to be a really fun Q&A with one of our favorites here on Chef AJ Live. Sometimes she's here by herself. Sometimes she's here with Dr. Doug Lyle. Her name is Dr. Jen Hawk, and she is broadcasting live from the most beautiful place on earth, Hawaii. I think Maui, actually, to be more specific. Please welcome back Dr. Jen Hawk. It's so good to see you again in your idyllic paradise.
It's good to see you too. Yeah, it's really very nice here today. It's cooling down a bit, so it's pretty perfect.
Yeah, so we have some questions, some that were sent in recently and some that I've been saving because I felt like Dr. Lyle, I don't know if they were kind of like about women's sexual stuff. I didn't know if I should have him do that. We'll start with that. But you are teaching or coaching. You're starting a class tomorrow, and I'm taking it. And I believe it's called Moments of Jen with Zen. Maybe talk about it a little. Are there still places? And if not, how can people find out more about your classes?
Yeah, so I used to, I used to work at TrueNorth Health Center, and when I was there, I did sort of a weekly gathering that I called Moments of Zen with Jen, just because it was a cute little rhyme, and I wanted to integrate a whole bunch of different things that I have done along the way with my own process and my own journey. So, I'm 7 years in recovery from alcohol, so a big part of my process around that in the early recovery days was 12 steps. So I don't like everything about 12-step meetings, but I do think there are components of 12-step that are very helpful for people who are going through any kind of addiction process, including addiction to pleasure trap foods, and just coping with life. There's really good tools that come out of 12-step. And then I also spent years doing really deep training in some meditation traditions and some Tibetan Buddhism and all of these things that I used to be really involved with. And so there are lots of components of that I also found very useful. I think mindfulness and discernment and awareness around your monkey mind are incredibly useful tools, again, for people, whether you're actively trying to get through, releasing pleasure trap foods, any other kind of addictive substance or behavior, or you're just going through a hard time, which a lot of people are. So, and of course, evolutionary psychology. So I came, once I was at TrueNorth Health Center, I started working with Dr. Doug Lyle, who is now my business partner. We're writing a book together. And the tools of evolutionary psychology and seeing the world through that lens and the sort of biological realities of human nature and human behavior and human relationships, that kind of completed the whole puzzle for me with all of these things that were just really powerful tools for living a better life and finding greater happiness and just doing things better as much as we can be expected to do. So I loved doing that at TrueNorth, and I decided to just start it up again during December in a virtual kind of way. So this is totally an experiment. The membership is still open. If people want to go to my website, they can go to jenhawk.com either click on group coaching or just go to jenhawk.com/Zen. And I sort of envisioned it as a little bit more, a little smaller than it looks like it's turning out to be. I've actually had quite a lot of people sign up, many more than I anticipated. So I don't want to close off membership and limit it because there is clearly such a demand. So I'm not quite sure what sort of form it's going to take. It's not going to be traditional group coaching where there are only a few people in the Zoom room. But if people are still interested and want to participate, they're welcome to sign up. It's going to be them and 150 of their closest friends. So come on in. I will be doing a smaller group coaching because clearly there's a call for this sort of thing. I'll keep this going into January, and I will really cap the membership then. And depending how this goes into December, it's only for 5 weeks, and I might split the group up. I might do 2 separate groups so we can have a little more of an intimate experience. It's just an experience.
Here's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer to it. From Angela. Is Jen's program tomorrow going to be available on replay for members of, she went ED, and I read it as erectile dysfunction, but I realize ED is Esteem Dynamics.
I know, it's a really unfortunate acronym, and I sometimes will start to use it, and then I'm like, no, I can't call my own website ED. Yes, it will be available in a replay if you're in the Living Wisdom Library and you're a member of our website. It's also for people who are already members of our website. Membership in this group is free, which I think is part of why I have such high membership. So yeah, the replays will be available. I'll post them somewhere on the Esteem Dynamics website in the membership section.
Wow, that's cool.
Mhm.
I want to know, I don't know your whole story, but what came first, the chicken or the egg? And what I mean by that is, did you end up going to True North to work and then meet Dr. Lyle and become his business partner, co-host of the podcast? Or did you know him and he brought you to True North?
I had been in conversation with him before. So I wouldn't say he brought me to True North, but I definitely knew him. We had connected a bit. I talked about my dissertation with him a little bit. We had a little bit of a pre-existing relationship, but it wasn't until I really got there. And, he would come out and give his lectures every weekend, and we would talk afterwards and just kind of spin all of these like, oh my goodness, you touched on this concept, and that's so interesting because it feeds into what I'm working on with political science here. And so I think I was able to bring a different perspective to some things that he was interested in. And I found evolutionary psychology just an incredibly powerful modality for my intellectual work and for my personal life, as so many people do when they come across it. So we call it source code. You may have heard us call it that before, that, when people first encounter this way of looking at the world and understanding themselves and human nature, it dings this deep understanding that, oh, that's actually true. Like that really is the manual for human life. And it's not always pretty, and it's not always what you want to hear, particularly for women, but it strikes a deep chord with people because it's speaking to very fundamental realities of human nature.
Well, do you know how lucky you are? I mean, like people just like they're so jealous of you. You get to write with him, you get to be on his podcast. I mean, like, chicks really dig him.
Yeah, well, I pay the toll in the mansplaining. So for all the mansplaining that the world gets at large, I get a much higher dose. But no, of course he's brilliant. The mansplaining is also mostly brilliant, and I am very, very, very fortunate to work with him. So
Nice.
if there are any chicks out there who dig him, who want me to fix him up, make your case. He's always looking.
I know. Well, I've tried. He's, what? Well, here's the thing. He doesn't believe in astrology, and I tell him that is because he's a Virgo. That's exactly why he doesn't believe, which proves that astrology is real. But Virgos, as you know, the Felix Unger of the zodiac, they're very, very picky.
Very picky, very, yes, very, just very demanding. Yeah, I mostly regard astrology as a sort of a entertainment at this point in my life. But because it's my openness that keeps it in the catalog at all. But yeah, you could not come up with a better cartoon Virgo than Dr. Lyle. He's about as Virgo as they come. I tease him about that all the time.
Well, we love him, and we know he loves you. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions here. Okay, so let's get to the female sexual health question, because I know, I think it's a good one, and I take it very seriously. The lady that asked, it's anonymous. She goes, no one in the plant-based space really talks about sexual function in postmenopausal women. They basically tell you not to take bioidentical hormones like estradiol because of the cancer risk, but they don't tell you what to do about having no sex drive or having painful sex. The lubricants are not enough. What are your thoughts? And it is true, because when I interview a lot of doctors, and that comes up, and most of them are and they're not gynecologists. They say, no, don't take it, because apparently, I guess that helps stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I will preface this by just reminding folks that I'm not a medical doctor, and nor am I a clinical psychologist. I'm a coach that is, passionate about evolutionary psychology, but my Ph.D. is in the social sciences. So my sort of ability to speak meaningfully to this is pretty limited in terms of giving actual medical advice. But I can give the evolutionary perspective, which is that, women post menopause there was a pretty uncommon situation in the Stone Age. So we lived much shorter lifespans in the Stone Age in general. And there was just, it was not a very common situation for women to be leading active and certainly active sexual lives past menopausal age. It just wasn't something that we adapted to very robustly and commonly. So a lot of this is just, it's sort of because of the modern environment and because of the lifestyles that we live now, and because we have managed to solve a lot of our ancestral problems with infectious disease and sanitation and everything else that leads to longer, healthier lives where women are able to enjoy, sexual experiences into older age than they ever were in our ancestral history. There's a little bit of a mismatch. We always start in evolutionary psychology with looking at where's the mismatch between what we're actually successfully adapted to in the Stone Age and how the modern environment differs from the environment that we actually adapted to. And so, this is a little bit of a mismatch. It's going to be more of a mismatch for certain women with genetic predispositions to these issues than others. Some women are able to enjoy, they don't see a lot of disturbance. They don't have the pain or any other issues that come in later in life. A lot of women do. So I don't think I have anything really meaningful to add other than what the plant-based doctors are already saying. I would just sort of have people pull back a little bit and look at this as it's a problem of the species that we did not adapt to the situation. And so we have to solve it creatively, just like we are going to solve any other problem creatively. The lack of sex drive is a almost universal situation with women, again, because this is part of our adaptive history. So women, postmenopausal women, it's very, very common for them to have their libido significantly drop off, because women, if they did live that long in the Stone Age, were very much moving into more of a nurturing grandmothering role. This is called the grandmother hypothesis in evolutionary psychology. They were not continuing to serve as mates to the men in the village. They would generally have their last child at about 40, and that was about the point at which, by the time that child was old enough to be on their own, that was basically the length of time they were expected to live. And so it would make sense for evolution to shut down the reproductive process at the time that you're having that last child, right before your lifespan runs out. So you're not having babies right before you die. That would be a mistake from evolution's perspective, because there's no one around to parent the child. So it all makes sense if you take the big picture of things and you look at us as successful animals who embraced certain reproductive strategies and evolutionary adaptive strategies to increase our reproductive success. But again, that's not necessarily the life that we want to live in the modern environment. So I would take the best nutritional advice and do the best you can with what you have, and accept this to whatever degree you can as an unfortunate part of getting older.
I thought you were going to say do the best with what you can and outsource the rest.
Nothing wrong with that.
Oh, that's funny. Well, when you look at other animals, they never have sex except for reproduction.
Yeah, not universally, but it is very common that most species are just having reproductive sex. So yeah, we have a recreational element, which is a little unusual for the species.
That's so interesting. Well, here, this one I think you might do really well with. This is from Lena, and it's more general. It's not specifically about sex, but she says, how do I come to terms with the fact that I am aging and not gracefully?
Well, this is the question. This is why I say that evolutionary psychology is sort of a rough ride for women in particular, because you start to kind of look at the whole situation of what we're really up to as a species. The whole point of being here, the general conceit of looking through life through an evolutionary lens, which is what Dr. Lyle and I do, is that we are an animal who is here primarily, we want to survive, but we mostly want to survive because we're in the business of reproducing our genes into the next generation. So that's really our job. That's our entire purpose of existing. It's not necessarily the meaning of life. I like to make a distinction between the purpose and the meaning of life, because the purpose is very clear. The purpose for the human species is the same as it is for any other species. It's you're trying to get that DNA into the next generation to continue your genetic line. But the meaning of life is, that's a much broader, more existential question, and we can talk about that. That brings in a lot of other ideas and important concepts. But so you always have to kind of start, like, what is the purpose? Like, why am I here? Why did nature build me this way? Why am I aging in a process that I find very uncomfortable, and it's not ideal? And it all has to do with you've done your genetic duty. This sort of mate value that is associated with beauty early on in women's lives is something that diminishes over time because of these evolutionary impulses that I was talking about a minute ago, and the shift that women were making into that sort of grandmother crone role in the village, essentially. So men are able to reproduce up until their dying day, and women are not. So this is just, it's a trade-off that evolution made to have a more successful species. And so as part of that, we wouldn't be bothered by these aging cues that we experience in the same way that men are less bothered by them. I mean, men, of course, are often bothered by their aging cues, but it doesn't torture them in the same way that it tortures women, because for women, they're watching the most important part of their mate value decline. Beauty is at the heart of what men are seeking in a mate, at least during that reproductive time. We know this from cross-cultural studies that David Buss has done, and just all kinds of evolutionary science all over the globe. So you're supposed to be feeling some anxiety and some depression about that, because this is something that has historically been the most valuable asset that you have that is slipping through your fingers as you're going through life. So this is just, again, the sort of, it's always helpful to understand where these feelings are coming from, to contextualize them and depersonalize them a little bit. It's the emotions are being generated by the fact that you were looking at you're having a changing, what we call cost benefit analysis on your competitive standing in the world. And you're realizing that your competitive standing has slipped a little bit relative to younger women in terms of competing for the same mates. And that is inherently distressing and difficult, and it causes a lot of bad feelings to arise. So that is supposed to happen. There's nothing unique or particularly terrible about your experience with that. And so I think that a big part of that is just having that awareness, getting that the personal insult of the process out of it, and realizing that there are plenty of other things that are of great value in your life, that the things that are important in relationships as we age change from the things that are important in relationships when we're young and in that reproductive competitive scramble. And to focus on those things and building those kinds of connections with people who recognize what you have to offer, and continuing to invest in self-esteem processes that continue to encourage your competitive status in the world in ways that are not necessarily related strictly to that beauty chip that is so important in youth.
Do you think it's only about beauty, Jen? Because I know, I think I look better now than I did when I was younger, but I don't like aging for other reasons, because things hurt that didn't used to hurt. I don't see so good. I don't pee so good. So is it just about beauty, or is it just that you just can't do the things that you used to be able to do?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, any kind of, physical debilitation is going to have the same, it's going to work on the nervous system in the same sort of way. So anything, basically you can look at your emotions and your moods and your feelings about the world as a barometer of your competitive standing in the world. And people sometimes get annoyed with us for talking this way because it feels very reductionist and life is not just a competition. But from an evolutionary perspective, it really is, because we're engaged in this battle of natural selection and sexual selection for survival of the fittest, right? So you can really kind of reduce it down to that notion. And the way that nature kind of worked this out is to let us know if we're on track or not. It shifts our feelings in response to how competitively successful we are at any given time. And so things like not being able to pee very well and having aches and pains and all of the signs of aging that come along with that. It's just, hey, I'm not at the top of my game anymore. I'm vulnerable. I'm in trouble relative to other people in this Stone Age village. I require more assistance from other people. I'm more dependent on other people. All of those things are they're troubling signals to be receiving, because they make you more vulnerable. They take you out of that position of power in the Stone Age village, and you realize that your well-being and your safety are all dependent on others, and that generates, as it should, some anxiety and some hustle to maintain those relationships and to sort of get better signals that guarantee your position within that Stone Age village.
So you feel vulnerable.
Sure. Yeah. Which we all are. I mean, that's that is definitely true. Those signals are not coming out of nowhere. But you are less vulnerable in the modern environment than your ancestors were in the Stone Age. So in the Stone Age, if somebody did manage to escape infectious disease and getting eaten by a tiger up until their 60s or so, and they started to have the sort of more debilitating consequences of getting older, they were increasingly a liability to that village, because the village was living on the edge of survival anyway. And it really sort of needed everybody to be at their their best. And so as we get older, you're constantly, if you don't have the mate value that you had when you were younger, you're looking for substitute cues that you're not going to be neglected and forgotten if things go badly in the village, if there's an invading tribe that is trying to, take over your town, if you run into any kind of trouble, if there's scarcity of any kind, you want to be receiving signals from people that you are valuable, you're not going to be left behind, that people care about you, and that you're important. And those signals are important for us to generate happiness throughout our entire lifespan. But the source of those signals changes as we age, and our perception of what is valuable about us also shifts with time.
You're from Alaska. Is it true that they used to just put the old people out on an ice floe and send them off?
Yeah, I mean, that is something that happened in certain cultures in antiquity. I don't think too much of that happens anymore, but yeah, I mean, we will make apocryphal references to that. Like you're no longer of use to the village, and so we'll just leave you behind. I mean, this happened in all kinds of ways. It happened with children who had developmental disabilities. It happened with people who were wounded on hunts and in war. They were left, and so because it is in our ancestral history such a high cost to not have people around us supporting us and taking care of us when we are vulnerable, we are very highly attuned to looking for cues from other people that that's not going to happen, because in our past, all of our ancestors, if that happened to them, they were dead. So we've adapted these abilities to kind of scan the environment and look at people and try to read body language and try to read all of the different things that they're letting us know about whether they're going to be there for us if we do break our leg out on the hunt, or we do get a little older and we can't keep up like we used to. So these are the things that actually are a big component of driving human happiness, because we need to know that we're part of the group.
Wow. It's interesting because I'm Jewish, and like my mother, like she didn't get the memo about that, because she was like, a mother can take care of 10 children, but 10 children can't take care of one mother. Like she just expected, total care.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There are big cultural differences. We talk about this a little bit in the book too. And this is just, I mean, you're tracing the genes through, generation after generation after generation, and how strongly, tightly knit those community bonds were, and how much of your success it differed depending on your cultural context, your geographical context, all kinds of things, how much competence you had to have if you did find yourself out on your own versus how dependent you were on the group. So you will see that variation throughout the species even today.
That's interesting. When you talk about that, part of it is like grieving the loss of beauty. How do you define beauty? I mean, is it different for women and men? And was it different in the Stone Age? I guess my question is like, is it more important that like a pretty face, a nice figure? And was it the same in the Stone Age?
Yeah, there are certain universal cues of beauty that are cross-cultural. So the real leading authority on this is David Buss, who is an expert on evolutionary human sexuality, and has written an amazing book called The Evolution of Desire. If people are more interested in his work and where these ideas come from, that we're not pulling them out of thin air. So we know that there's great agreement cross-culturally on characteristics that are considered beautiful among women. So a certain a hip-waist ratio, for example, we've all heard Dr. Lyle talk about this. I think we've talked about it on other episodes. That is not an arbitrary characteristic, the sort of hourglass-shaped female. What that is telling you is that is a female who is not pregnant because her stomach is not sticking out past a certain point, and she has literally childbearing hips. So you're looking for these fertility cues. That's really the watchword of what signals beauty for women. So anything that is associated with strong fertility is generally considered youthful. Or beautiful, which is why youthfulness is essentially synonymous with beauty in many of our understandings and cross-culturally. So there are definitely different, distinct preferences from culture to culture. Some people value certain types of hair, certain types of, taller, shorter, anything like that. But the sort of youthful fertility cues cut across all cultures. And that has been consistent for the entire species. And men, it's a little different. I mean, some of it is similar, where, you can take some of these studies that Bus has are just remarkable, because you'll have a pile of 100 photos of men or women, and then you have the opposite sex kind of sort them by who's most attractive to least attractive. And there's actually very tight agreement among people. So nobody is looking at a photo of, a guy, let's call him George, and nobody, that group is not, you don't have a split group saying, oh, well, half of them think that he is the most attractive guy in the pile, and half of them think that he's the least attractive guy. That's not how it works. They're going to coalesce around a range of attractiveness with that person. People are going to vary by a couple of points. Some people are going to think he's the 78th most attractive. Some people are going to think he's the 65th, but it's not going to be this huge difference. So all of this is with men and with women. It's what we call mutation cues. So how different are they? How far off base are they in terms of their genetic health? Yeah.
Nice. Take a look at the chat. There's something in there, and I'm going to read this question from Sharon. It is for Jen. What does Jen love most about being in Hawaii? What are her favorite foods there? And what are her favorite things to do that she can get lost in? And how often does she do them?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I'm multitasking a little bit because I was as directed looking at the chat. So I'll just get this out of the way, because there are a lot of questions about my former relationship with Dr. Michael Greger. I really just would wish people would embrace the holiday spirit of kindness and compassion, and just kind of keeping gossip to yourself. So this question, I think this person does not understand that we're no longer together. So I'm no longer being bombarded by questions about nutritional information, but it just gives me the context to, I am human. I see the comments. I see the YouTube comments. I see people discussing and gossiping and not really knowing anything about the real situation. And I will just put on my little disagreeable hat and ask you to please not do that. And remember that there are humans involved who, loved each other very much, continue to love each other very much. And it's complicated. So
thank you.
Yep.
That's why I didn't want to ask the question. That's why I put it in the chat.
As for what I like to do in Hawaii, I mean, I moved here in part because as someone who was born and raised in Alaska, I love the outdoor environment. I love anything outside. I love the ocean. So I've been learning to paddleboard. That's been my new obsession. So I kind of came not knowing the first thing about surfing or paddleboarding, and have been obsessed with learning to paddleboard. So I'm very terrible at it. I can't handle much churn in the water at all, but I find it very meditative and very, very peaceful. There's so much, you can kind of use it as a boat and go snorkeling off of it and look at turtles and look at fish and all kinds of cool stuff. So I have been spending as much time as possible on the water. I hike with my dogs. I live in an area kind of up in the mountains with wonderful hiking trails. And so I take them out every day and we go exploring and sniffing around and, foraging for local food and all kinds of things. So there's no limit of exciting, really soul fulfilling things to do here.
Have you had I think it's called poi. It's like brown. It's kind of like pudding.
No, not since I've been here. I have had it before, but I actually haven't managed to find it here. Sort of as the whole time that I've been here, one or the other of us has been traveling and in quarantine and going out of quarantine. And so when you have sort of traffic in and out of the house, everybody has to quarantine at the same time. And so I haven't been out and about to many restaurants or anything like that. So my activities have mostly been of the natural variety sort. But yeah.
Angela says, how is your favorite sea turtle?
Myrtle the turtle is doing very well. I go and visit. There's a particular beach that I like to go to in the mornings, and I think there's one particular turtle that I see all the time in a similar spot on that reef who likes to swim under the board and say hello. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Lex, who's watching live, says, hi, Jen, with the holidays coming up, have you got any advice for dealing with narcissistic family members? My family are so deliberately emotionally dysregulating. I dread seeing them. Any advice? Well, I'm not a doctor, but I'd say, don't go.
Yeah, our general piece of advice with difficult family is to, the first rule here is to just limit your exposure. So if you've got toxic family members, you just want to limit the amount of time that you're spending with them. So if you have to go, like really, I would take a moment and really reflect on whether you have to go or not. So very often we get tossed into these situations and feel like, we have this obligation by virtue of our personality. So you might be very agreeable, you might be very conscientious, you might have gotten yourself into something where you're sort of, you feel like you have an obligation, where really, if you stand back and you take a hard look at that, you're not really obliged to do anything in particular for the holidays. You don't have to spend time with anyone. If it is a case where you really can't get out of it and you really have to deal with these people, I would, do everything you can to control your environment. So this is the number one piece of advice with staying out of the pleasure trap, and it's applicable to all areas of life, because you cannot control other people. All you can control is your environment. So if you're visiting the family, don't stay with them. Don't stay in the guest room where they're going to be waking you up at all hours and bugging you, and you're going to be having all the issues that come with that. Go stay in Airbnb, or stay with a friend, or stay somewhere where you have some independence. And then it's like, okay, you've got some amount of time that you have to spend with these people before you get through the holidays. So we call this mathematizing the misery. This is like, you sit down and you actually calculate out, okay, I'm here for a week. That's 7 dinners and 2 brunches and 3 visits that I have to make to the house. And so you actually go ahead and calculate out literally how many hours that is of time that you have to spend with these folks, and then just start counting it off like you're a prisoner marking on the wall. And that helps you kind of realize that it's not forever. So much of our distress often comes from that feeling that you're you can't see the end of it. You're sort of burdened by the situation, and you feel like there's no way out and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and you're going to be stuck forever. So if you kind of create that container around it, and you can see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, it can help you get through the short term. That, and the only other big piece of advice is to choose your battles. Recognize that a lot of conflicts that come up with family members are battles for status, and if you can just accept that you don't need status and you're happy to kind of let them have it, they can be right, they can be blowhards, they can say whatever they want. If you're not fighting them for that status, that is going to eliminate a lot of the inherent conflict and a lot of family problems. So it's very, as my meditation teacher used to always say, would you rather be right or happy? And so sometimes it's better to just let go of needing to be right, especially if it's about lecturing people about a whole food plant-based diet, or it's about anything else. And it's just like, you know what? I'm just here for the pie.
That's interesting, because when you ask that question, would you rather be right or happy? Part of my brain said, well, of course I'd rather be happy, but my behavior always is, no, I want to be right.
Right. Well, you've got that disagreeable bias in your personality. It's very hard for you to kind of like not be right. And so even more important for you, if you want to avoid those conflicts that are just guaranteed to be status battles, zero-sum status battles. This is like somebody wins this, somebody gets more accolades from the village, and you just roll over and let people have it, and it neutralizes the conflict immediately.
Oh, I can't do that. Can't do it.
Yeah. Well, then you're even more important for you to control your environment and just like limit those interactions as much as you can.
I do.
Yeah.
So M Watching Live says, I am now a normal BMI for the first time in my life. Congratulations. And I'm in my mid-30s, and I'm now perceived of as in my early 20s and beautiful by men. How does one deal with this status change?
Interesting. Well, it's just you're going to get more used to it with time. So any kind of status change, for good or for ill, it takes some time to recalibrate. So so much of what we're doing in life is we are basically little computers that are running inferences on how things are likely to go based on how things have gone in the past under similar conditions. And so you haven't quite caught up. The software hasn't caught up with the new hardware yet. And so you just just have to give it time. You have to collect more evidence of how the world responds to you and what kinds of things you can expect as you go about these interactions with other humans. And over not too much time, you will start to slowly recalibrate. It's a process that everybody goes through as they age, and people definitely go through if they lose weight, if they gain weight, if they have any sort of major change that changes the way that people perceive them.
Nice. Okay, well, speaking of gaining weight, where did this question go? Sorry, I'm looking at two screens, the ones that were emailed in. Okay, hold on, it's right here. Okay. Why are, this is from, well, said, don't say my name, so almost did. Why are so many prominent people in the plant-based movement who have publicly chronicled their weight loss success stories now slipping and regaining weight?
Because it's the pleasure trap. So, I mean, we can start from ground zero with what the pleasure trap is and how tenacious it is and how almost nobody ever beats it. But this is something that we are not adapted to deal with. And the fact that anybody can ever manage to beat it to any degree for any amount of time is nothing short of miraculous. I mean, this is an incredibly strong force of human nature. It requires you to constantly override your most powerful instincts to defeat this thing. And so if people really want to understand what the pleasure trap is and how it works, there's an abundance of material out there. You can watch any of Doug's talks on it, tons of other resources. So I won't go through the whole logic of the whole process, but really people really underestimate what you're dealing with, especially if you are a person with some egocentric bias about it not being too hard for you. So there are certain types of personalities who they kind of hear the good word from on high of what to do and how to change their diet. And they're like, oh, okay, all done, got it figured out. And they're not dealing with genes that really want to gain weight and put on weight. So if you're a personality that struggles a little more with doing the right thing in a consistent way, and you have a genetic predisposition to put on and keep on weight, you are you're facing it from all directions, and it requires extraordinary vigilance to protect against that creep. And it's going to be the norm that people are going to kind of go in and out of states of success with this problem instead of just like solving the problem and being done for life. This is something that is not just a problem for plant-based doctors. It's a problem for everybody in the world who is trying to deal with this. So I'm always trying to get people to change their mindset around this and realize that if this is a struggle, it's going to remain a struggle. There's nothing that clicks for most people that just changes the situation overnight, and you never have to worry about it or think about it or struggle with it or have relapses ever again. This is a 3 steps forward, 1 or 2 steps back kind of process for the rest of your life. So the idea is that, success and failure are not determined by anything other than how many times you pick yourself back up. I mean, that is really true when it comes to the pleasure trap. It's true with any kind of process where you are fighting your deepest genetic instincts against a force that you in no way are adapted to cope with or deal with effectively. People are surrounded by abundant environment of supernormal food that we are biologically engineered to be drawn to. So it's incredible that people don't slip more often.
So the fact that they chronicled their journey in the public eye, that doesn't make it easier or harder for this problem.
It can have unintended consequences. It can do both. So some people, if they do that, it sort of increases the cost of relapse a little bit. So, they sort of realize that they're being watched and that there's a village judging them. And that can go into the overall cost benefit analysis of how likely they are to be able to fight their instincts and resist this thing. In other cases, it can set up what we call the ego trap, So people, if they set those expectations too high for themselves, very often people will have this situation where the expectations on them are so high that they don't believe that they can live up to them and consistently live up to them. And so the correct evolutionary strategy becomes to actually self-sabotage, to prove to the village that, hey, I'm not even trying. I'm so far from trying that you can't judge me anymore. And so it can have sort of unintended reverse consequences if people are too public too early in their journey before they really have this figured out and consolidated. There's a lot of enthusiasm and early energy that comes when people first initially change their diet. They usually have a lot of early success. They lose weight very easily, especially if they have a lot of weight to lose. And there's a strong impulse to share that with the Stone Age village because people are perceiving that there's a lot of status to be gained by sharing it. And then they get into it and they realize that they've got the dragons at the door never go away. Like you may have sort of scared them away briefly and you feel like you're all safe, but then they're back and they've brought friends and they've brought a battering ram and they're never going away. They know they can follow you all around the world. They know exactly where you are. They actually learn your weaknesses even better over time. And that this is a lifelong battle that is going to be chronically very difficult for people. And so once people kind of get to that zone and realize that's the case, it can really become a self-defeating strategy to have been too public and too enthusiastic about an early journey.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned the ego trap because there's a question from Eric about it. This is the one I told you before I came on that I didn't ask Dr. Lyle last time because I thought it might make him mad, but I know even if it makes you mad, you won't get mad. So he says, I know that you and Dr. Lyle talk a lot about the ego trap, but I still don't understand how telling people to lower the bar is helpful. Doesn't it just give people a license to just keep failing and not do their best? And then the people that could have done their best don't try as hard.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, you've got to account for personality when you're talking about something like the ego trap. So, you know, we will generally give the advice that you don't want to set the bar too high because it can kind of create this feedback loop of not being able to meet the expectations. But every ego trap is a snowflake. It is a snowflake that is produced by the circumstances of the goal that somebody is trying to reach, the dynamics of the expectations that are put on them, and that person's personality who's at the heart of it. So a lot of personalities are more susceptible to ego traps than others. And it's all relative. So, you know, I would never say across the board to set expectations low. You don't want to set expectations low across the board because for some people that is going to be very demobilizing. But if you've got a situation where you have somebody who has been immobilized by their inability to make progress toward a goal because the feedback that they're getting is that the external audience, the people in the village are expecting greater things from them than they can expect themselves, then that is a moment where you may want to lower the goal and lower the signals of what you are expecting from them to make it easier for them to close that gap. So this is a very individual thing. And I think it's a little bit of a misunderstanding of the ego trap to sort of apply that widely and say, oh, we're just telling people to lower their expectations. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's the wrong thing to do. You really need to know who you're dealing with and what the circumstances are.
Okay, great. This is from Danica. Why are people so emotionally charged by the political arena and the people who deny that COVID is a problem and refuse to wear masks?
I think the political charge goes both ways. So yeah, you definitely have people who are all fired up by the COVID deniers. That's the main thing that gets them going. And I think what you're seeing there is you're seeing very high conscientiousness that's looking at behavior in public that to that conscientious nervous system feels like a huge mistake that's going to get the whole village killed, right? So this is the same sort of thing. You've got those conscientious genes. Those are the same conscientious genes in the Stone Age that were watching people eat rotten meat and being like, what are you doing? Stop eating the rotten meat. You're going to make yourself sick. You're going to die. This is going to be a disaster. Stop. Like, that's bad. Throw it out. So you've brought those genes into the modern environment, and you've tossed them into a democracy where people kind of get away with doing whatever they feel is best for themselves. And you're watching that process of people sort of pursuing their own goals in ways that are very much at odds with what you perceive as the most successful, the most important thing for the collective. I mean, this is the paradox at the heart of living in a free democracy where people are regularly going to do things that we perceive as costly to the collective. And so whatever you perceive as costly to the collective today, i.e. people not wearing their masks in public, maybe that is correct. Maybe that is a costly behavior to the collective. collective. But you can flip the scales, and those people are going to perceive some of your behavior as being costly to the collective at some point down the road. So this is sort of a situation where to live in harmony with people who are very different from us, see the world very differently from us, is inherently very charged, because these are life and death stakes as far as our Stone Age brains are concerned, and maybe life and death stakes in the modern environment as well. But unless you were willing to embrace a higher degree of tyranny, this is sort of part of the deal of living in a modern democracy, where people are free to be idiots if they want to be idiots, and people are free to pursue their own goals in their own ways, short of authoritarian direction not to.
Right. Well, here's a question from somebody who's a health coach. And she says, why are so many people really struggling with food and weight loss issues during the pandemic? And how can we best be of service with them? Are they really struggling any more than they are with the pleasure trap at any time? Or are they using the pandemic as an excuse?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of data on this question. There were some really early studies that showed that actually they're really interesting studies. They were looking at the actual data that was uploaded to the cloud by everybody's smart scales. so everybody who was using smart scales, somebody got a hold of this and was able to aggregate it. And this was fairly early in the pandemic, but the weight gain was not that high. It was, half a pound, something like that over the first couple of months from those people. And of course you could say, well, there's selection bias because those are people who are weighing themselves every day, so they're more likely to be on track, et cetera, et cetera. But the data that I have seen of the sort of the average 20-pound weight gain, or these sort of other things that you'll see, that's also pretty questionable. So you'll see that, like, a study commissioned by Weight Watchers will say that, or similar sort of sources. So I think we actually don't know if it's true that people are struggling more than at other times during COVID. Definitely anecdotally, a lot of people are, but I think it is in large part, this is the pleasure trap. The pleasure trap is always there. And the dragon has found a new way into your house behind this pretext of, oh, it's unusual times, it's COVID, I can't get to the grocery store, they don't have my usual stuff. All of this is, it's equivalent to somebody who is trying to stay out of alcohol, having to get a job at a bar and starting to drink because they're in the bar. It's increased the proximity, it's increased the likelihood, it's increased the excuse making. And so it doesn't mean that people aren't struggling more and haven't regained, and that because it is more difficult to figure out the best efficient ways to kind of get in the groove in ways that help you escape the pleasure trap. It's COVID itself is not the culprit. The pleasure trap is and always is the culprit.
I love it. Thank you. So Debbie says, I can't seem to go grocery shopping without buying sweets and pastries that I love so much, and it is causing my weight to creep back up. 15 years ago, I lost 55 pounds, but 20 pounds have crept back on, and I can't seem to control myself. Any suggestions? I say get the groceries delivered.
Yeah.
The pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is sort of the theme of the day, is it's the pleasure trap. I mean, that stuff is in the store. It's not going anywhere. You're going to keep buying it if you keep going to the store and you keep kind of having it regularly enough that your nervous system is expecting it. You're having the cravings, you're in the conditioned cram. All of those sorts of things make it, you've got to radically change your environment / behavior to just rule this out as a possibility. So yeah, order your groceries from Instacart for a month, and don't allow yourself to include it on the list. You have to get out of that immediate, you have to get through that immediate withdrawal period, and have a little more control over your immediate tendencies and those crazy cravings that follow immediate withdrawal, just like you do with any addictive substance.
Great. Let's see. I just saw something from Kathy. Is the Zen with Jen, Moments of Jen with Zen, via Zoom? I signed up, but didn't get a link. I'm not sure where to go Saturday. Can you help?
It is via Zoom. So if you've signed up in the last day or so, I need to send out another batch of the forwarded email with the link, because I've had people kind of sign up at various points, and this is very kind of low tech operation. So I've just been manually forwarding the email as we go. If you signed up a while ago and you haven't gotten a link, then maybe it didn't get to you somehow. I will today, I'm going to email the whole list, the link again. And if you don't get it by the end of the day, just email me directly, and I will be sure that you have it. It's a private Zoom link.
Okay, great. The ones that are having struggles, I wonder if their environment is clean, the ones that are saying because of COVID, they're gaining weight. I wonder what their house is like.
Oh yeah, most people I've talked to who have struggled in COVID are their immediate environment is not clean. So they have kids, they have a spouse, they have trashy food around. And this is just like, it's not supposed to be easy. It's not like, I never would have gotten sober from alcohol if I had continued to go buy a 6-pack and leave it in the fridge and just like, oh, I'm not going to drink it. Like it doesn't work that way. You've got to get it out of your nervous system's calculation about whether it's a good idea to go get into it, because if it is there, your nervous system is always going to decide that it's a good idea to go get into it. It might fight for a long time. You might spend the whole day fighting that craving and devoting a lot of time and energy into, no, it's not a good idea. No, I don't want to do it. No, it's like, that's not in my best interest. But if it's still there by 10 o'clock at night, you're going to get into it. You're going to wear down all your defenses and it's going to happen. So unless you have extremely unusual conscientiousness and perhaps extremely unusual motivation, even if you get away with it for one day or 1 week, this is something you can never count on your willpower when it comes to the pleasure trap. Your willpower functionally does not exist. You have to control your environment.
That's what I've been saying since I learned that from Dr. Lyle 10 years ago. People get upset when you say that. You know, it's funny because some of my clients actually have lost weight for the first time because of the restaurants being closed.
Yeah, the restaurants are closed. The social pressures are gone. You know, before COVID, the most common thing that Dr. Lyle and I would hear about why people couldn't lose weight is because of all the social pressures. They're going out to lunch at work, and they have family members who want to get together once a week and go out, and they're pushing the bread and the oily dishes on them. And so now all of that's gone. And so it's just you and your kitchen and your food. And so if you're still struggling, you have to stand back and look at what kind of role is the pleasure trap playing in your life, because I can guarantee that if you've gained weight during COVID, there's pleasure trap food sneaking in under the gate somewhere. You're not eating potatoes and kale. I just guarantee it. So you might be maintaining weight on potatoes and kale because your balance of potatoes to kale is out of it's a little too calorie dense, but you're not going to be gaining weight eating that way. So somewhere, if you get out the magnifying glass and you're rigorously honest with yourself, there's pleasure trap crap getting in under the door.
Absolutely. Maybe we need 2 playbooks, weight loss for introverts and weight loss for extroverts.
Yeah. I mean, it's a different set of problems. This is why, Doug has that great talk called The Perfect Personality. You really need to understand who you are and what your personality liabilities are when it comes to solving the pleasure trap problem, solving any kind of problem. So if you're an extrovert, that's a different set of challenges that are going to come with that in terms of staying compliant to a healthy diet than if you're an introvert. Same if you're disagreeable versus agreeable, all the way down the line.
Nice. So Matt says, hi, Jen, from an evolutionary psychology point of view, why would someone identify as asexual with no sexual interest whatsoever, but is able to acknowledge beauty in humans?
So genuine asexuality is part of the human sexuality spectrum, just like, so many different things are. So we can kind of talk on balance about what the most successful reproductive strategies of the species are on average, but you've got bell curves of characteristics that fall across the entire population. And that includes a lot of people on those tail ends with different characteristics. So there are not that many people, at the tail end of the bell curve who identify as asexual, but there are some. And so, that has traditionally been associated in communities with sort of its own kind of authority. Those sorts of people are sort of above the reproductive fray, and they can call upon more divine authority. They have like this shaman-y kind of role. They're in connection with things that are beyond the hurly-burly of the normal human experience. So this is why you see vows of celibacy in a lot of religious traditions, etc. So there is an evolution. There's a small evolutionary strategy associated with asexuality. There may be different strategies associated with people who are not truly asexual, but who have come to identifying that way out of sort of competitive defeat in the mating arena. So, people who we call this is actually a version of the ego trap that we call the enlightenment trap, that it can take the form of sort of withdrawing from the mating arena as well. So if you meet with competitive failure after competitive failure after competitive failure, and you start to kind of come to this conclusion that, yeah, you're not going to find anybody suitable to mate with you, there can be sort of a logic to withdrawing from the game entirely and saying, you know what, I'm not even interested. I'm not interested in romantic interaction. I am much happier just appreciating the beauty of the world and staying above all of that trouble. So it could be a little column A, a little column B. It just depends on the individual situation.
Great. Okay, I lost one question, so I'll go up to another one from Emily. I still have cravings even though I haven't eaten off-plan food in months, much less cravings than before, but still there. Is this normal?
Yeah, it's normal. I mean, it would be the wrong thing for your brain to do to completely forget about the really exciting food entirely. So the craving will die way, 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 way down over time, but it's the right thing for your brain to do to occasionally just market test the idea. Be like, are you sure? Are you sure you don't want that thing? Because it's linked to so much pleasure. So the same thing will happen for somebody who's quit cigarettes, for someone who's quit alcohol, anything else, that you can get that sort of extinction curve of the addictive behavior of the Pavlovian conditioning paradigm. You can get the craving down to almost zero, but it's never going to actually be zero, because you have created a dopamine pathway in the brain that occasionally the nervous system is just going to cycle back around and test for vulnerabilities. That would be the right thing to do. So I had this experience. I was in the grocery store the other day getting ingredients for a super healthy pumpkin pie. I was making Kathy Fisher's pumpkin pie, and so I had to get some nuts, but only enough nuts for the recipe, and everything else. And of course, it's holiday time at the grocery store. And so it's just like, it's a pleasure trap-a-palooza, right? I mean, there's flashing lights everywhere about all the exciting things that are happening. I'm obviously, feeling emotionally crappy. So I'm sort of susceptible to self-medicating a little bit to get a little dopamine drip of happy food. And so I'm in that susceptible state where the dragons they're like, hey, wake up, she's vulnerable. This is what happens. This is when people talk about emotional eating, this is part of what that sequence looks like. This is the nervous system looking for a set of vulnerabilities where it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective to get into something that's super normal. So I fought one pleasure trap battle after another. I was like, no, I'm not getting that. No, I'm not getting that. No, I'm not getting that. Get away from it. And then I watched in amazement as my brain market tested the idea of alcohol for the first time in many, many years. It was like, well, okay, if you don't want the ice cream and you don't want the pizza and you don't want that and you don't want this, then yeah, what do you think about, what about wine? When was the last time you thought about wine? It just came out of nowhere. It was amazing. And so I have enough, I've been sober for 7 years. It was not a white knuckle craving in the sense that I'm like actually considering it. And I have enough psychological mindedness that I sort of was just able to stand back from that and watch that process. But that's what happens. That is the brain hunting around for where can we find the lowest hanging fruit of pleasure that we can feed into this nervous system. And it will continue to do that. It never completely goes away. Your best strategy is to control the environment, to not have those cues, to not be in the grocery store sort of looking around, to let these things pound on your nervous system. So it does get better over time, but this requires lifelong vigilance, which goes back to the question of why people regain. Why do people relapse? Why does Philip Seymour Hoffman relapse after decades of sobriety? This is why. It's you don't solve addiction, you manage addiction, and it requires a daily vigilant struggle. So you don't necessarily have to, go to an AA meeting and declare your surrender to a force greater than yourself, whether it's for alcohol or Doritos or anything else, but you have to maintain your vigilance. And as soon as you let it down and you let this stuff under the door, it's going to come for you.
That's right. Yeah, I love that. Pleasure Trap-a-Palooza. I never heard that. That could be your next book. Terrific.
Like flashing lights,
Is there a tendency towards is a tendency towards body dysmorphia a function of high conscientiousness? If so, what are the ways to manage it?
Yeah, it's much more common with high conscientiousness. So essentially, high conscientiousness is always along with agreeableness, which they often travel together, you will see people kind of systematically undervaluing themselves. So high conscientiousness is finding flaws where they don't exist. You know, you're looking at a painting and it's like, it's really good except for that tiny little flaw right there. So this is just the nervous system. And if you have it yourself, you're going to be turning that lens, that critical lens on yourself much more often than somebody who's not as conscientious. So yeah, this is, again, dysmorphia is related to all of the ancestral impulses that women in particular have to get signals of their beauty and their enduring mate value. So you were particularly concerned about it because it is so linked to that entire process. So the people who I've worked with who have the best tools against dysmorphia is that they have somebody that they really, really trust. You know, they have a husband, they have a really good friend who can kind of keep track of the counter evidence against their case for dysmorphia and confront them with it, you know, on occasion. So no, actually, remember this, you know, you were distorted. You were seeing yourself in a funhouse mirror. This is not who you really are. Let me remind you of this time where, you know, you loved yourself and you saw yourself as you really are. I see you as you really are. This is really the only thing that people can combat it, because you can't retrain the mind out of that sort of hyper-conscientious self-criticalness. It's just always there. All you can do, I mean, this is a theme of what we've talked about. It's all about having the awareness of the distortion and therefore being able to step back from it a little bit and take a bigger view of it rather than just being sort of pushed and pulled around by it. The distortion does not have to be in charge of you if you can be aware that it is there and it's trying to tell you what the world looks like, but it's not reality. It's the goggles that you're wearing on the world.
Nice. Okay. One more question. Bailey wants to say hello.
Hi, Bailey, the cutie pants.
Dogs are awesome, aren't they?
They're just wonderful. Yeah,
They're my favorite. They're my favorite people.
Snoozling in the sun right now. Yeah. I love her little bow. That's so
No,
pretty.
just because people always thought she was a boy, so we started bows. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Anthropomorphizing, making her a girl. Okay.
Totally.
So Cynthia says, what are some strategies to lessen anxiety regarding chronic health concerns?
Yeah, this is again, this is mindfulness. So this is a lot of what we're talking about with mindfulness and awareness and stepping out of the distorted space is kind of what are often just known as cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. So it's about isolating the thoughts that are torturing you so much. So if you've got that anxiety, the anxiety is being driven by a series of thoughts that are being generated by a mind that is trying to make you more competitive. So you are a creature in the world that is very concerned about remaining competitive because that is the only way that your ancestors were able to survive and reproduce. And so if you were in a situation now where you have a chronic health issue, the mind is going to be looking through that ancestral lens going, I'm not as competitive, I'm compromised, I have this issue, therefore I'm going to generate a lot of anxiety about it in the hopes that I can shift it somehow and be more competitive. So it's about isolating that set of, you know, stinking thinking, as they say, and just getting very curious about it and interrogating it a little bit and trying to discover how much of that thinking is based in reality, how much of it is anything that you can do anything about. Is there any way that you can shift the needle with your situation around your health to improve the situation? And if there's not, then it becomes this sort of process of slow acceptance and not being completely at the mercy of that thinking. So it's simple but not easy, as they say. So, but the first step is just kind of like realizing that you are not that thought.
Wow. Well, thanks. This hour has gone very, very fast. If you guys can't get enough of Dr. Jen, then come tomorrow. I'm posting the link many times, Moments at Jen with Zen. We all need this in general, and we need this especially now. It's at 5 p.m. Pacific time. It's for 5 weeks, right?
Yeah, it's there. I think the last one is January 2nd. So, and I think I will probably continue doing something like it into January. So if it doesn't work now because of holiday craziness or anything else, just keep keep an eye out, and I'll be rerunning something similar in January.
Well, this is like the perfect time because this is when a lot of people are struggling. And I love 5 p.m. Pacific time because that's my dinner hour. So this is.
Yeah. I had to, I know that's an inconvenient time for people, particularly internationally, but with my own schedule, the way it is this month, it had to be that time or nothing. But everything will be on replay. So if you miss it in person, then you're certainly welcome to watch the replay.
That's terrific. And if you can't make it, we hope you will at least click the link and check it out. Dr. Jen Howk will be back with Dr. Doug Lyle the first of the year. They are on the 15th of January. I know that because I have it memorized. Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much. It's just so fun talking to you because the background, it's very relaxing watching you.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry there was like a weed whacker back there for some amount of time, but that's like always happens anytime I'm on a Zoom call. So yes, it's
you did a really interesting the last on your YouTube channel. You have a YouTube channel, Jen Howk, and you did something very smart that it's hard now to do because I've had my YouTube channel for 10 years and I was advised not to, but you have your comments disabled, which is like the most brilliant thing. But you were wearing a
this is my favorite mug. This was a gift from Dylan Holmes and Reeves. And I mean, I tell you, people, like, I don't care. You might be saying nice things in the comments right now. I'm never going to see it because for every 100 nice things, the one shitty thing is going to drive me nuts. So, and my nervous system
like that too. But I was advised that after 10 years, it's not so good. So, yes. But my question is this, the last one you did, it was about prelapse. You had a shirt on that I loved. It was a black shirt with open shoulders. Where did you get that?
Black shirt with open.
It had like an open shoulder, black shirt. I love that shirt.
Oh, where did I get that? I don't remember. Somewhere in Santa Rosa, maybe Macy's, probably Macy's. I didn't do much clothes shopping in Santa Rosa other than Macy's. So that would be my hypothesis, but it's a couple years ago anyway. So
yeah, anyway, I just wanted to say.
Oh, you're so sweet. Yeah.
I really like that. Sorry, I didn't mean to give you a compliment. but I said I really like, because those are the kind of shirts that I like. So
yeah, no, they're very, I like that one. So
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jen Howk. Thank you all for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. If you come back tomorrow at 11 a.m., we have another great show, a cooking demo with Elspeth Feldman. She's been on the show many times. She's the Speedy Vegan, and she's going to be making recipes from my new book, Own Your Health. Aloha, Dr. Howk.
Aloha.